Good evening, colleagues. I'm Dr. Rajiv Kovil here, and I'm bringing you this month's edition of the Diabetes News Nucleus. It's an effort by MedTalks, and it has been supported by Mankind Pharma. Our endeavor in Diabetes News Nucleus every month is to bring you what is the latest in the metabolic space, whether it's cardiology, diabetes, obesity, and lifestyle, so that you get to know what is happening across the globe. In this month, we had a fantastic paper by the Asian Pacific Association for the study of liver, coming up with a clinical practice guidelines for the management and diagnosis of what we used to call as NAFLD or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They are now calling it as metabolic associated fatty liver disease. So there is a change in the nomenclature or in the way it is called, metabolic associated fatty liver disease. And we all know that liver seems to be the kingpin in this metabolic blunder of metabolic syndrome. And a lot of abnormalities which occur in a patient with metabolic syndrome, one of them being non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, drives the global epidemic of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. So very often metabolic associated fatty liver disease, or what we used to call as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, seems to be the hallmark of metabolic syndrome. And what is metabolic associated? What were the recommendations from this elite body? Was that metabolic associated fatty liver disease, the risk factors are diabetes, overweight, obesity, metabolically unhealthy, normal weight individuals. Another thing is that we should also mainly exclude patients who have significant alcohol consumption. So when I say significant alcohol consumption, it should at least be 21 standard drinks per week in men or more than 14 drinks in women. Extremely important. Apart from that, the major risk factors remains overweight, central obesity, type 2 diabetes, and we need to make sure that we are able to screen high risk individuals, and we should screening them using a sonography is more than sufficient. But the individual components of the metabolic syndrome, whether it's obesity, central obesity, dyslipidemia, and hypertension, should be treated as to their goals. That's extremely important. After we have actually screened them and we have realized this patient has metabolic associated fatty liver disease or MAFLD, we can do either we could score them using a FIB score or an FLI score, or we could also go in for an advanced kind of an imaging like an elastography, which can be used to measure control attenuation parameters CAP, and that's a more sensitive tunal ultrasonography. This may help us in kind of finding out which patients can do better with a referral to a gastroenterologist or a hepatologist. And we all know that non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or metabolic associated fatty liver disease seems to be one of the highest risk factors for diabetes, for obesity, and also for progression towards chronic liver disease, cirrhosis, and then to hepatocellular carcinoma. So this is something that we should put in our practice and make sure we are able to kind of prevent metabolic associated fatty liver disease, and if we diagnose them, we make sure that we are able to get them into remission also. Another very important paper which got published again was a sub-analysis of the COMPASS study, which got published in JAMA this particular month, and it looked at a combination of rivaroxaban and aspirin in patients with symptomatic lower extremity peripheral artery disease. And we all know that patients who have symptomatic lower extremity peripheral artery disease are at very high risk for cardiovascular events and also leg events. So this looked at a head-on comparison of rivaroxaban and combination of aspirin versus aspirin alone. And what it showed at the end of the analysis was conducted between May 2016 to May 2020. It showed that the combination of rivaroxaban and aspirin was able to reduce it. There was an absolute risk reduction in major adverse cardiovascular events and major adverse leg events as compared to aspirin alone. So in future, apart from just using aspirin for our patients with peripheral artery disease, we could actually add on rivaroxaban and also not only prevent cardiovascular events and also major adverse leg events, including amputation. Another very important study which got published earlier in the year in Jan 2001 was a study which compared intermittent fasting versus continuous energy restriction for weight loss as well as metabolic improvement. It was a meta-analysis and a systematic review. Very interesting because we have a lot of youngsters who go into intermittent fasting, and also a lot of people who on a long term go for a low caloric restricted food. And what it showed that intermittent fasting has got acute benefit in weight loss as well as fat loss. But over a long period of time, whether it's caloric restriction or intermittent fasting, intermittent or continuous energy restriction seems to have similar effect on weight loss and metabolic improvement. So in the long term, whether you use a continuous energy restriction or intermittent fasting, you would have similar benefits. Intermittent fasting obviously very very difficult to do. We have a fantastic paper on intermittent fasting as well. Another very important study which actually came out this particular month was on the reproductive age in type 1 diabetes. Data suggests patients with type 1 diabetes, their menarche is at least 6 months late as compared to age matched girls. Apart from that, menopause is also at least 2 years earlier in people with type 1 diabetes as compared to people without type 1 diabetes. And thus, the reproductive age comes down by 2.5 years. Very important finding because, again, all know that once diabetes complicates pregnancy, it becomes extremely difficult, and people with type 1 diabetes have to be under very very critical level of control to make sure that we are able to get a healthy child and also not affect the quality of life of the mother. Now, since we are speaking on diabetes and women, let me introduce you to the topic today, which is about diabetes and women. And nobody better than inviting our guest today. The guest today is Dr. Sarita Bajaj. Dr. Sarita Bajaj is a very well known personality in the field, in the metabolic field, and in the endocrine and diabetes field. I would say that she is the most popular female endocrinologist in India today. She has been head of the Department of Medicine at the MLN Medical College in Allahabad. She also has been at the frontier in all kinds of trials, whether it's related to endocrine as well as diabetes. And she also has been the past president of the RSSDI and the Endocrine Society of India, has also been the president of the SAFES, which is the South Asian Federation for Endocrine Societies. So has been a leading figure in the field of endocrinology and diabetes. And I welcome you, ma'am, to this part of this month's edition, where we're going to speak to you about diabetes and women. Hello, madam, and welcome to Diabetes
Yeah,
News Nucleus. My
thank
first
you.
question to you is that gestational diabetes is on the rise in India. Would you recommend a universal screening for all women who get pregnant, or we should be only screening for the high risk groups? What is your recommendation?
What we are now using, of course, there is gestational diabetes, which is the most important component, but hyperglycemia in pregnancy, because quite a lot of type 2 diabetics, not knowing that they have diabetes, conceive. So that is, of course, that will collectively be termed hyperglycemia in pregnancy.
Mhm.
So classical gestational diabetes is what you're asking me about. Gestational diabetes, of course, its importance is paramount, because if we can control diabetes during pregnancy, it's known to have a transgenerational impact. So we can stem the so-called, which was already ongoing, this ongoing pandemic of diabetes. So 2/5 of women with diabetes are in the reproductive age group. 1 in 7 births is affected by gestational diabetes. And diabetes is very serious, and it is a neglected threat to the health of the mother and child. I've already told you that it significantly increases the risk of maternal as well as perinatal morbidity, mortality, a lot of pregnancy complications like preeclampsia, hypertension, obstructed labor, premature delivery, and you can have large babies and small for gestational age infants. You can have congenital anomalies and newborn deaths due to respiratory problems, hypoglycemia, and birth injuries as well. In gestational diabetes, they are 20 times more likely to develop type 2 diabetes subsequently,
True.
almost 3 times more likely to develop ischemic heart disease, 2 times more likely to develop hypertension. So, like I said, if we protect the health of the mother and the child by improving access to screening, care, and education, it will provide a golden opportunity for us to be able to prevent type 2 diabetes.
This gestational diabetes, madam, can we look at it as a window of opportunity to intervene so that we can prevent diabetes in future? But unfortunately, most of our patients after pregnancy are lost to follow up. How can we get,
Absolutely.
what can be done? Do you think that, they realize that it is just unmasking of hyperglycemia during pregnancy and they are actually at very high risk in some years to come? Any strategy you think we could, means on a real, since you are at the helm of affairs at many places, could there be a national policy on this or something like that, do you think?
So, Rajiv, what you started asking me was that how common it is and should we screen universally? See, Indians are very much ethnically susceptible. So, yes, in our country, it should be universal screening. So, that policy has already been adopted, number
Mhm.
one. But how do we not lose these women subsequently? See, women will go with their child to the clinics where the children are vaccinated. So, if
Right.
somehow we can tie up with these PSM or social preventive medicine clinics where the children are going for vaccination, that opportunity should not be missed because we say after delivery, 6 weeks, six
True.
weeks later, then three
True.
months later. So, how
True.
are we going to get them to come back? So, this is the only way. So, when they are perforce coming down, so
Mm-hmm.
that must be mentioned in the guidelines and that
Very true.
must be rigorously implemented.
Very
That
true.
must be
Very true.
rigorously implemented.
Very
Yeah.
true, madam. Madam, do you think metabolic problems, whether it's obesity, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, are they different in women as compared to men? Is there any difference? Is there gender differences in there?
Of course, there are. Rajiv, as far as heart disease is concerned, believe you me, that
Mm-hmm.
it is the leading killer in women of all ages. See, women with diabetes are 4 times more likely to have heart disease. Diabetes is the number one risk factor for heart failure in women.
Mm-hmm.
And this risk is increased due to the loss of relative protection from atherosclerosis by the female sex hormones after menopause. So even the symptomatology and the
Mm-hmm.
signs, they tend to
Mm-hmm.
be different in women.
Mm-hmm.
They have also a higher risk of other diabetes related complications like blindness, kidney disease, depression, and especially elderly women with type 2 diabetes. They have end stage renal disease and end stage renal disease. They
Mm-hmm.
have a significantly higher mortality as compared to men with similar problems. So women have more of vulvovaginitis, they have more of urinary tract infection, there's more chances of cerebrovascular disease as well. So all these factors make them very much more susceptible. Depression is also much more common,
True. True.
psychological
True.
stress,
Very true.
apart from the cardiovascular and the cerebrovascular problems. We have, interestingly, in men, there is more of impaired fasting glucose. In women,
Okay.
there is more of impaired glucose
That's all.
tolerance. So at least when we say we just do a fasting and get away with it, I think for women we must do the postprandial sample as well to be able to make a confirmed diagnosis of what is the status of glucose intolerance. And they also, of course, obesity, especially central obesity, is much more common in women. They seem to have more of brown adipose tissue as well. Of course, I think there are a lot of social and psychosocial factors
True. True.
which also need to be discussed.
True, true. I completely agree with you there, madam. In terms of majority of studies, there's always been a gender bias. We kind of extrapolate a lot of evidence which are seen in men to women. There are very few studies where they have equal representation. So
That's
do you
right.
think we should
That's right.
have studies also which should have equal participation of both genders? And do you think treatment would also be different, gender-based treatment in future? Do you think that there will be difference in gender-based treatment also?
I agree with you absolutely over there. Yes, they are underrepresented in trials. If not 50-50, I think it should be at least 40-60. At
True.
least women should be 40%, but ideally, of course, it should be 50-50 if you want to give us at least a fair representation. And the management, yes, even the drugs we need to keep in mind as to women-centric, what are the specific side effects in women. I think that also is very important.
Very true. Madam, the leading bodies in chronic diabetes care, whether it is the RSSDI or the Endocrine Society of India, could these bodies come together, because you have been at the helm of affairs of both these bodies, and could these bodies come together and put some kind of recommendations so that many a time women with these chronic disorders, whether it's diabetes or fatty liver disease or obesity, do not get the kind of treatment which probably the man gets, for a lot of social and so many other reasons. Could there be some way that we could make sure that their representation increases, their investigations, their literacy, women's health literacy improves? What would be your suggestion to these bodies which you have always been at the helm of affairs?
Continuing with the psychosocial part, see, the discrimination and the stigmatization is very much more pronounced for girls and women, and they carry a double burden. Of course, education, I think, would be, if it's literacy, should be 100%. Because if it is 100%, that means the women will be educated. And like Mahatma Gandhi said, that you educate a woman and you educate the family. So
True.
this
Very
is,
true.
it starts off with that. So if they have good access to information, they're able to move around freely. They don't need to be escorted. They can go to, even when they go to the hospital, women need to be accompanied. So I think unless they're able to do all this for themselves, get their medicine supplies, I don't think it's going to work out. So women overall compared to men are more vulnerable. They have fewer opportunities for being treated. They have less access to care. They receive less support. And this is true globally, but definitely in the lower socioeconomic and low middle class groups, it's very much more important, particularly in countries where we do not have universal health insurance. So I think
True.
that should be brought into our country, and universal health coverage. So if that is done, it will make a lot of difference. As far as when I was in RSSDI, we published a monograph, Diabetes Mellitus Issues for the Indian Women. And I encouraged CMEs, updates, seminars focusing on gestational diabetes. And remember that the theme for World Diabetes Day,
Yes. True.
at least that was looking after women. It was the whole focus of World Diabetes Day that year was on women. So I was very happy that somehow IDF chose women and diabetes theme, and we conducted a lot of programs across with with of course other societies. We got together and we conducted programs across 100 cities in India.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, so I think RSSDI, I'm very proud to say that RSSDI and the Endocrine Society of India, they have come out with the RSSDI ESPSI publication, which
True.
is the guidelines have come out in 2020, beginning of 2020. So that covers just about everything. And they're the latest, so one can refer to them. I think that is a very big step forward. Like you said, getting together with other societies, but
Yes.
gestational diabetes in particular. So what we did is we prepared a set of slides. This has to be for the public. So whenever you do a program, a
Mm-hmm.
public education program, you can have a 10-minute talk on gestational diabetes in the local language. So we
Right.
did it in Hindi because ours is Hindi speaking. We did it in Hindi and we did it in English as well. So if you have just a 10-minute talk, so that women are aware and they need to be aware, like you say, they don't know that they have diabetes. So
Very true.
any woman who is going to get married, whenever she decides to have, and I think this should be this should be decided. It shouldn't just happen overnight.
Should not
They
have an
should.
accidental pregnancy. Very true, madam. Yes.
Exactly. So they need to be aware of the fact that before they conceive, they must have a blood glucose tested at least once. Of course, especially if they're obese, if they have a strong family history. So all those factors we know are very important. But like I said, universal testing is important in our country.
Very true. Thank you, madam, for giving us your insight about diabetes in women and complications and other chronic disorders in women. Thank you so much for being with us, madam. We will get back next month with our next edition of Diabetes News Nucleus with another top KOL from the country who will give us their pearls of wisdom. Thank you so much for a patient hearing. Thank you so
My
much, madam.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.